Hey everyone. So I recently posted a question on Twitter and that blew up. And here is the particular question. Let's assume that you're building a SaaS product and hundreds of companies share your DB and one tenant uploads a massive data set and suddenly your whole platform kind of grinds to a halt for everyone else. This is the classic noisy neighbor problem, and if you are in the SaaS world, either you have already faced it or eventually you will. That's inevitable. So the question led to a lot of people discussing solutions, some of whom are indeed DB experts, and they shared how they have solved the problem. Soran, who is a founder and CEO of Prisma, kind of replied by mentioning how they solved a similar problem, and it was so insightful. I will probably post some screenshots here. Jeremy, who has indeed kind of built quite a few DBs by himself, he loves exploring LSM-based DB architectures, also kind of shared what could be a good solution. And some of the approaches I thought may not be a good idea, but when I kind of deep dived, I realized, well, this is something that can be done as well. And that's really the power of community, right? So I will link the tweet in the description, and I would highly recommend everyone going through it, but obviously after you have watched this particular video. So let's talk about how to solve the noisy neighbor problem. And before that, let's imagine that you are living in kind of a apartment building and you and your neighbor share the same water supply, and one fine morning your neighbor kind of decides to fill up a huge big Olympic sized swimming pool, and suddenly you have no water pressure, your shower is pathetic, you cannot even kind of make your morning coffee. That's exactly what happens in a multi-tenant architecture. One tenant, one customer can literally hog all the resources, making the service slow and unusable for everyone else. This isn't just a technical issue, it's also a business killer, and what's obvious is that the frustrated customers will churn and your reputation will take a hit. So let's dive into the solutions and strategies for tenant isolation. There are a few strategies, each with its own trade-offs, and number one that I wanted to discuss is the Schema Per Tenant model. This is kind of a good middle ground. So everyone in the same DB, but each tenant kind of gets their own dedicated set of tables. The pros of this is that you get a good logical isolation. A tenant query will only hit their own tables, so they cannot really easily interfere with others at the data level. It's also more cost effective than a database per tenant, right? So, but there are cons, right? There are cons. You are still sharing the hardware. A massive data import can still hog CPU, memory, IO, and it will kind of slow down things for others, right? So what about another approach? Can we think about a database per tenant model? Let's talk about that. Actually, this was something I thought would not be a good idea, but Jeremy's response led me to think about it. And this is indeed one of the ways for sure. So a separate DB for each tenant. The pros you get here is that this offers the best isolation, right? Your noisy neighbor can literally fill their own DB to the brim and it won't affect anyone else's performance. It's also very secure. The cons, obviously, this can get really expensive and complex, and when you're managing hundreds or even thousands of DBs, which means you will have more overhead for backups, updates, you will have to monitor everything. It's like giving everyone their own personal water tower, which is obviously effective but super costly, and that's why I thought it might not be a good idea, but it is definitely a viable approach. You can have a tenant ID model as well. So what happens is that each tenant have their own tenant ID column in every table, and this is basically the cheapest and the easiest to manage. You have one DB and one set of tables, and you just filter every query by tenant ID, right? This kind of offers the least isolation, and this is where the noisy neighbor problem kind of also becomes more severe. You will have to put a lot of safeguards in place. So how do you make the entire solution work, right? Obviously, you will have to be proactive and you need to kind of implement resource governance. This means you will have to think about connection pooling, limiting the number of concurrent connections, and obviously you'll have to think about query throttling. You will have to cap the rate of request from a single tenant, resource quotas, setting limit on storage and compute, etc., right? One good thing that you could do is you could move heavy jobs like massive DB or not DB, but massive data imports to a separate queue, and then you can run them in the background. But what happens is there is obviously no one size fits all answer, right? The right strategy will depend on your scale, your customers, your budget, and all of your additional needs. So you might even start with a shared model and kind of evolve to a hybrid approach as you grow. But one takeaway one key takeaway that I would like to share is that don't wait for the noisy neighbor to flood the architecture, right? Design for isolation from the get-go, and it's obviously the foundation of scalable and reliable SaaS platforms, right? So let me know, what are your strategies? What do you think? Drop a comment below. I would also love to hear more from you. And if you found it useful, give it a like, subscribe for deep dive into building scalable systems. Thanks for watching.